All right, let's look at these briskets. This one is the one I think I'm gonna pick out. And I'll put it against this one, for example. So you can see this one is kind of thick on the flat, okay? This is the point, this is the flat. You can see how thin that is and how thick that is on that side. And how it's got this big chunk right here that's kind of 3D. They call it the mohawk because it's gonna pop up like that when it cooks. This one has a little bit flatter mohawk, and you can see the edge of it is even almost all the way across. That's a good brisket right there. So that's one that I'm gonna pick out. I took the brisket out of the vacuum pack and I dried it off, just kind of blotted it off so it's a little bit easier to work with. Because the goal of trimming it is to get everything the same level. You see this is about twice as thick as this side. And you want to be able to get it to cook more evenly. This is called the mohawk over here, and this piece will often curl up when you cook it, and it'll stick out and it'll kind of burn and crisp up. Any little corners and edges of jagged little pieces like this, you want to trim off. So let me go ahead and get started trimming. I'm gonna go ahead and take the mohawk off completely. And I'm gonna try to get these, nice sharp knife. I'm gonna try to get all these little jagged pieces off here. Just kind of get started. And I'm gonna flip it over. This piece back here, this big, I think this is called the deckle. I'm still learning all this stuff as well. But you're gonna go ahead and take a big chunk of that off as well, because that's fat, almost solid all the way through. So you can see there's just a little bit of meat on the edges of that. I don't know if you can, how well you can see all that, but now this one has kind of this long, janky point on the end. So I'm just gonna get kind of aggressive and go for a cleaner cut. And again, you want everything rounded. So you're kind of gonna go on a 45, kind of go on a 45 on all these little corners until you get, like a rounded edge to the brisket. And again, the reason for that is all those little jagged pieces on the edge, those are gonna end up burning up and drying out, and you've got airflow going over the brisket. I think this technique that definitely comes from cooking on offset smokers, so the air is going over the brisket. So you just want to make sure it's nice and aerodynamic. I'm gonna go ahead and take some of these little pieces off the bottom. You don't want to, I don't usually trim too much off of there. There's a little bit of silver skin on here that might toughen up a little bit. Some people will trim the whole, every little piece of fat off of there, but I'm not too worried about it. Actually, what some guys do is they'll start over here and they'll just take a piece off as a sort of a guide. And that way you can see how much fat you're working with. So you can see this one's got a good amount here. We're pretty good on the top half of the brisket here. Do one more little slice. And what I want to do next, and this is going to seem a little bit extreme, but I'm going to actually go in pretty deep on this and cut this corner off just to give it a nice rounded edge. Again, you want the whole thing to be really aerodynamic, and the flat sometimes tends to dry out, and you want to make it as even as possible. So if it's super thin, you might want to take some of that flat off of there. I don't really want to take much more of that off. on this end. Sometimes you'll get a brisket that has a big fat cap on the flat side, so you do need to take more off. But this one's pretty good. I could sit here all day and try to make it perfect, but this is a really nice shape. So you can see. So now you've got this curvature, and it's like a little rocket ship going through the smoke. I'm going to start with seasoning the bottom, and I'm going to use a adhesive stick, but I like mustard. So I'm going to go ahead and go with a little bit of yellow mustard. You don't need a whole lot. You're just trying to get the salt and pepper seasoning to stick to the outside of the brisket, so you're going to use this as your sort of glue to get everything. This is kind of what you want to do. You just want a nice even coat. I'll go a little bit more on the point end since it is a little bit thicker. And you see what I'm doing with my hand over here on the side is I'm kind of catching some and sticking it to the side like that. You don't need a whole lot of seasoning. Personally, I don't think you need a lot of seasoning on the bottom of the brisket. It's going to go more on the top, and that's how you're going to get your nice crust. This is a coarse ground pepper. Most people are using what's called a 16 mesh black pepper, if you can find that. This is the HEB extra coarse black pepper, and it works great. So they have one that's, I think it's called a butcher grind or something like that. It's a little bit too thick for my taste. This one, to me, is a nice in-between. You don't want it. I think we're good on that. Now I'm going to transfer it to the tray that I'm going to cook it on so that I don't have to pick it up and move it and disturb the crust afterwards. All right, do a little bit of mustard. And don't go too light on you're gonna have to learn by experimenting, but you don't wanna under season. This is a big piece of meat, so you can pretty much get away with seasoning the heck out of it. And you wanna season from up high and get a nice even coat. And I'm seeing kind of like patting it in to kind of stick that pepper on there. So that's good to go. That's going to go in the smoker tomorrow morning. So that's phase one. I'm just going to take all this stuff. I'm not going to cut it up or do anything else to it. And I'm going to stick it in this nice enamel pot, and I'm going to fill it up with water. So it's just to the level of the top of the brisket, if you can see that. So once you've got that on the stove, I'll kick it on to high heat and put a lid on it just to get it up to a boil. Right about the time when it comes to a boil, you want to turn that down as low as possible and just let it ride. All right, we've got 2 briskets sitting out at room temperature for about an hour before we throw them on that pit. And this tallow has been in here overnight, rendering down, and that's coming along nicely. I'm gonna go ahead and leave it in there because I got some errands to run. So I'll strain it out when I get back. And these guys are about to go on the pit. All right. This guy is heating up. Set for 275. Okay, so at this point, it's about 4 hours, 4.5 hours into the cook. We've gotten up to an internal temperature of 127. There's a little bit of discrepancy with the thermometer. Says that the ambient temperature is 156 inside the pit, but the pit thermometer is reading 253. So I'm going to go with it's, split the difference somewhere in between. All right, we're going to take a look. It's 6.5 hours. So it's 4:45. And we put it in at 10. So it's been 6 hours and 40 minutes or so. And we're at 148 internal temperature. This probe is saying it's only 176 inside this box. This says it's 266 inside this box. So I'm gonna let it keep on going as the temperature keeps on climbing. But we're heading to 168 and then we're gonna wrap. Okay, so I went ahead and moved those briskets into the oven. That smoker was just not getting hot enough, and it's going on 12 hours. So put the oven at 300 degrees. I put both of them in. They're at 152 internal temperature, and they need to hit 168 before we take them out to actually do the wrap. And I also took the tallow and strained it out into this bucket like this. I'm going to put it in the fridge and let that harden on the top. All right, so these hit their 168 internal temperature. I think they got up to like 169 point something. So this is still pretty firm. It's not all soft and jiggly like it's gonna be. But what we're gonna do is I've got some of the melted tallow here, and I'm just gonna drizzle a little bit onto the paper itself. It's hot. Nice and toasty hot. And I'll drizzle a little bit onto the brisket too. Don't get too crazy with it, but you want it to kind of be in a little package of its own fat. So again, we're going to put a little bit of tallow down on the paper, and that's just going to help it be a little bit more flexible so you can get a little bit tighter wrap, because you really want the paper jammed right up against the brisket. You don't want any air gaps. All right, so now I'm gonna find the point and the flat, and I'm gonna find that spot right in between so I can get into the thick part of the brisket and get that thermometer back in there. All right, we just hit 201. Okay, that took a little bit longer than usual. That's what, 14 hours, almost on the money. I'm gonna go ahead and put these in here. What we've done here, by the way, is we took them out of the paper after they hit the 160. So they rested down to 160 from 201 down to 160. Once they hit that 160, I took them out of the paper. I put them in a bunch of plastic wrap. I didn't film that, but you're just going to wrap it in a bunch of plastic wrap and drizzle some of the tallow from the paper over the top. And now I'm gonna put them in here. This thing says 275, but I am not believing that that's the actual temperature inside, but I'm gonna put it down to 170 anyway. And so what we'll have here effectively is a resting cabinet. All right, so I'm just gonna stick them in here and make sure there's some water in the water pan at the bottom down there. And we're gonna let those go overnight on a rest. All right, we're 8 hours later. It says the box is at 150. I think it was a little bit warmer than that. It's set to 165. I'm not going to poke a hole in there though to check the internal temperature. If it's 150 to 160 to 170 even, it's going to be fine. You can see it's kind of melting out a little bit more tallow into the tray here.